The owl and the pussycat went to sea in a beautiful pea green boat. They took some honey and plenty of money wrapped up in a 5-pound note. Then Cruel sailed by on his luxury yacht, escorted by 2 submarines. Wearing only a Speedo, he cried, "Fire the torpedoes!" All because he detested pea green. Chapter 10. Fergus was wrong, or at least partly so, for even Elsbeth could not help but feel sorry for the owl upon hearing the full story of his wife's untimely demise. After all, in addition to having lost his beloved Vera, Fergus bore the extra burden of not having been able to save her, as well as the added guilt of being the sole survivor of the attack on the pea green boat. "The sad fact is," he said, "that owls can fly for much longer than cats can float. Believe me, I tried my best. I took her by the nape of the neck with my talons, and with all my strength I struggled to lift her from the water. But there's a reason that cats eat birds, as he pointed out, and not the other way around. With her fur soaking wet, she was just too heavy. In time, she slipped from my grasp and vanished beneath the waves, never to be seen again. Eventually, I was rescued by 3 men in a tub who happened to be passing by." "Probably should have been wearing life jackets," said Elsbeth. "You have heard of the Titanic, haven't you?" Fergus, who had not heard the Titanic, chose to ignore the callous remark. He looked off toward the castle again with those round yellow eyes. "You see that?" said Fergus, gesturing with his wing. "The part with all the scaffolding?" Elsbeth's eyes were excellent, but no match for an owl's, and she squinted off into the distance without success. "Word is he's putting in a new bowling alley," Fergus continued, "if you can believe such a thing." "I sure can," said Elsbeth. "I love bowling, knocking those pins for a loop like they were 10 Sophia Jean Fleeners all lined up in neat little rows. Bam! Take that!" "It's not a matter of whether one enjoys bowling," Fergus snipped. "The point is that he's building it while there are people going hungry. I'm confident that once you meet the scoundrel, you'll feel just as strongly as the rest of us do about him. Speaking of which, you'd better get going if you want to be back by nightfall." "You mean you're not coming with me?" asked Elsbeth, her nonchalant attitude an attempt to hide her disappointment. "Don't worry," said Fergus. "I'll be watching." "Whatever," said Elsbeth. "I'm glad you're not coming along. You're just an old stick in the mud anyway." "I am not a stick in the mud," Fergus protested. "You're right. At least with a stick in the mud, you can flick mud at people. You're no fun at all." "I am very fun," said Fergus, in a tone that to Elsbeth didn't sound the least bit fun. "Ask any of my friends, and I have plenty of them, which is something I doubt you could say for yourself." Before Elsbeth could respond, Fergus took to the air, first flapping in the direction of the castle before banking sharply to the left and disappearing within a grove of trees. And so Elsbeth did the only thing she could. She began walking. Trudging would be a more accurate description. Her heavy feet scraping along the ground. For the next half hour, she encountered not a single soul, and she eventually felt as though perhaps she'd been too hasty in having thrown Jean, the indignant stick, into the brush. As it often did when she had no one to talk to, her mind started to wander. She began to find amusement in the look of her shadow, which by now was that of a lanky giant with thick feet and a long tapered head. She stretched her arms out ahead of her, locking her kneecaps, and began walking like Frankenstein's monster. She even added the accompanying guttural groans for her own amusement. She continued this until she was overcome by the feeling of being watched. Elsbeth stopped in her tracks, lowered her arms, and raised her head to see several sets of eyes gazing back at her. 8 of the eyes belonged to 4 exhausted-looking horses, while 4 more pairs occupied the heads of the pudgy men sitting upon the backs of those horses. The men were all dressed identically, with poofy red hats and dark blue tunics over bright white shirts. Each of their faces bore some type of decorative facial hair. A Van Dyke beard on one, a goatee on another, one man with a waxy handlebar mustache, and the 4th with a full beard and thick, shrubby sideburns. In their hands were long spears, the business ends pointing skyward, while the butts rested in leather holsters attached to their horses' saddles. "Elsbeth Puel?" asked the largest of the men, the one with the Van Dyke. By the way the others deferred to him, he seemed to be the highest-ranking member of the group. "You too?" said Elsbeth. "How do you know my name?" "We have been dispatched to escort you to the audience with His Majesty, King Cruel, ruler of all the land, Lord of the Seas and the Moon, Duke of Banbury Cross, Baron of Gotham, Royal Knight Companion of the Most Noble Order of Silver Bells and Cockle Shells, Earl of St. Ives, Great Steward of the Pumpkin Eaters, Knight Grand Cross of the Most Honorable Order of Knick-Knack Paddywhack, and the Royal Grand Champion of the Order of Pickled Peppers. Wow, said Elsbeth as the man drew in a much-needed breath of air. That's quite a mouthful. How do you remember all that? Practice, ma'am, the man answered. Now, if you please, his lordship is very anxious to meet you. Anxious to meet her? By now, Elsbeth's irritation was turning to intrigue. Though she had no idea where she was or how she got there, King Cruel, a man reportedly capable of unlimited evil, was anxious to meet her. What did that mean? Anxious. Anxious as in excited? Anxious the way a person is before a big exam? The man with the Van Dyke climbed down from the large black steed, an action that seemed to bring the horse much relief. Madam, said the man. He held the reins in one hand while gesturing toward the horse with the other. You want me to get on that horse? Asked Elsbeth. The horse leaned toward Elsbeth and whispered, Please, if you don't get on me, then he will. Quiet, the man sharply addressed the horse. No talking in rank. The four-legged beast snapped to attention and dutifully obeyed the order for silence. By now, Elsbeth's legs felt as heavy as bags of wet sand, and she would have been agreeable to riding a porcupine. And so, with assistance from the soldier, she climbed aboard the weary horse. This was Elsbeth's first time on horseback, and as the man led the animal on foot toward the castle, she had to admit that she was very much enjoying the experience. Asking for an alpaca now seemed like a ridiculous request when she could have a horse instead. If only Dolly Do-Eyes, or Fashion Farah, or whatever her name was, could see her now. Wouldn't she be sorry that she had cast her old friend aside so abruptly? As they drew nearer to the castle, Elsbeth was surprised at its appearance. Of the two kinds of castles, she had imagined it would be more fortress and less fairy princess, more dark, roughly hewn stone than symmetrical blocks of bright white, perfectly stacked and slender towers, and topped with conical red tile roofs. In short, it certainly did not seem like the home of an evil overlord. Just outside those gleaming walls was a smattering of cottages comprising the village of Banbury Cross. The residents pointed at Elsbeth as if she was some sort of celebrity. In fact, with all the attention, she was beginning to feel how she imagined a celebrity might. Important and powerful, yet vulnerable and uneasy. Her level of anxiety increased with each step forward. She had never met royalty before, unless she were to count William the Umpteenth, but Elsbeth saw very little regality in a man the size of a small table lamp who lived in a cane and was prone to bouts of lunacy. This, on the other hand, was the real thing. Horses, an enormous castle, and that smell. What was that delectable mingling of odors that greeted Elsbeth's twitching nostrils? Eager for more, she took the opportunity to draw in several large breaths. What is that? She asked. It smells unbelievably good. The feast, ma'am, said the man with the sideburns that resembled two dead squirrels, celebrating your arrival. And there it was, yet another indication that perhaps the stories Dumpty and the others had told her, if not outright false, then perhaps exaggerated to some degree. After all, how horrible could Cruel be if he were thoughtful enough to prepare a feast in her honor? On her very own birthday, the best her own parents could ever muster was a store-bought cake and a lousy scoop of ice cream. As Elsbeth and her entourage crossed into the castle's long shadow, the drawbridge was lowered while the portcullis behind it rose up slowly with the grinding of heavy chain. The tired horses clomped across the bridge and into a large courtyard. All around them were small shops that catered to the soldiers and the king's personal staff. With clapboard roofs, the shops sat side by side and offered up everything from candlesticks to fresh meats to scrumptious tarts, some still cooling on the window ledge. The man leading Elsbeth's horse stopped the beast in the middle of the courtyard and offered his hand, which she took as a sign that she was to dismount. The king's valet will be presently by to tend to your needs, he said. Until that time, please make yourself at home. Ride a black horse to Banbury Cross to meet a fine man who's made himself boss. Rings on his fingers, don't step on his toes, for he will bring torment to all who oppose.